1684 and the other from 1701 or 1702, and a sung liturgical poem, or a smote text, preserved in handwritten manuscripts and oral traditions. And both of the inscriptions are carved on the walls of Angkor Wat, and they're among around 40 or so major inscriptions that were carved by pilgrims, and pilgrims is the wrong word, pious donors, as expressions of their faith and prayers for their future during the Middle Period, especially from the 16th to the 18th centuries. And the language in these texts is usually referred to as Middle Khmer, though a few of them contain sections entirely in Pali. And in addition to the inscriptions, we also have texts on manuscripts, including palm leaf manuscripts or folded paper or Leporello manuscripts, which also contain texts in Middle Khmer, or were originally written in Middle Khmer. And part of the question I was getting at in this talk was, when we think of sung liturgical texts used today, how can we identify the dating for these texts? So I explored a number of different possible ways to date these kinds of texts, including comparison with other texts, including finding instances where the date is given very clearly by the author, comparison with Thai texts, or in other methods of trying to determine where and when might a text like this have been composed. But I was focusing on this method of comparing a sung liturgical text that looks like it might date from the Middle Period with several inscriptions that we have confirmed dates for, that is from 1684 and 1702, and seeing what we can learn about the dating of this liturgical text from looking at the inscriptions. And these inscriptions have been studied carefully by a number of French, Khmer, and Thai scholars. And they've published complete transliterations and translations into French and Thai of these texts. In working again on these inscriptions, I based myself on their work, and then I also used photographs of the stone inscriptions themselves to compare, sometimes against the rubbings. And there were a few instances when looking at the photographs produced a better reading than was produced from the rubbings. So hopefully that will be a contribution to this conversation about the meaning of some of these inscriptions. But broadly speaking, I agree with the transliterations that have been done by these scholars. But there are a number of instances where I disagree with the translations, and this particularly is with regards to specific kinds of Buddhist technical terminology relating to practices that some practices that we still see today in Cambodia, or texts that are still used in Cambodia, that I see these inscriptions as very specifically referencing. And sort of part and parcel of that is this sung liturgical text called Lotus Flower Offering that has quite extensive parallels with both of these inscriptions. And the inscription from 1702, the so-called Grande Inscription d'Angkor, has long been celebrated as the longest of these Middle Period inscriptions, and also the first instance of a poem in Khmer written on stone. And the inscription's author, the government official and pious layman, Jayanon, or Jayananda, is celebrated as a great poet, and indeed rightly so, but also as the first person to commit a poem in Khmer to stone. And it's with this latter claim that I disagree. And that's through my examination of IMA 31, which is attributed to a monk named Sampai Praprawitu in 1684, shows that it contains 6 stanzas of verse in addition to prose. And it's these stanzas that haven't been noticed by scholars before because they're hidden within a prose text, and they also contain some extra metrical portions that may have been added as a mistake, or it's not exactly clear why there's these hypermetrical portions to this part of the verse. But it's also quite clear that those verses in particular, and also a number of passages in Jayanon's inscription from 1702 are drawing on an earlier liturgical text called Lotus Flower Offering that we still hear today. Generally, the text performed today is quite short, usually only a few stanzas, but through a careful study of a number of handwritten manuscript traditions on palm leaf, on folded paper, I've been able to show that there's approximately a 39 stanza text that seems to be the oldest extant version we can find. And it's on this older version of the text that it seems like these two inscriptions are drawing from. So, therefore, Lotus Flower Offering, not only does it help us see what is in fact the oldest instance of a verse text in Khmer inscribed on stone in Cambodia, but it also, its connection with these two dated inscriptions shows us that it's perhaps the sung liturgical text or Smo text that's still performed in Cambodia today that was composed the earliest. So probably sometime in the 17th century. It could be older than that, but not likely. And finally, I'd like to suggest that in studying Khmer literature from the Middle Period, it demands that we pay close attention to the processes of translation, especially from Pali and from Thai, and borrowing, especially from other Khmer texts. And this is not a critique of the originality or the brilliance of Khmer writers during this period, but in a sense we need to come to terms with the multilingual, intertextual, intellectual world in which these authors lived. And to do this, I would say there needs to be much more research into the palm leaf and folded paper manuscripts that survive today in Cambodia. And even though perhaps 95 or 98% of these manuscripts disappeared between 1970 and 1990, they're still one of the most important resources for understanding Cambodian history, culture, and religion. So thank you very much. I hope the summary captured some of what you missed. And I look forward to your questions.